Hello, everyone. My name is Tatyana St. Germain with Great People Management, and I welcome you to another episode of the mini podcast series, Great People Talk, where we invite great thought leaders to share their wisdom and insights with you to help you on your path to greatness. If you find this content interesting, inspirational, or useful in any way, please subscribe and like us. We greatly appreciate it. Today, I'm excited to be joined by a very, very special guest, a best-selling author many times over, a brilliant coach, HR advisor, a friend, and a colleague, Paul Falcone. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tatyana. I'm glad you got the friend piece in there. I would have said that one first, but it's okay. It's good.
Last but not least, friend.
That's right.
So, Paul, you have been in the HR and consulting industry for a long time. You were an HR executive at Nickelodeon, Paramount Pictures, Time Warner, and others, and quite extensive HR experience and talent development experience in many industries. And now you are a principal and founder and CEO of your own consulting company. Can you tell us about the consulting that you do now? What do you specialize in?
Yeah, I'm having a blast. I started in the summer of 2022. So it's been about 2 years now, Tatyana. And the stuff that I've always been passionate about is teaching. So the teaching can be keynote speeches, or it could be company training. It's writing. So I'm an author, I'm a columnist, I do all that kind of stuff. But really the teaching stuff is what I've always loved. And after getting through COVID, I became part of the gray resignation, the ones with a little bit of gray around the temples. And I said, enough with the corporate stuff. Life is short. I want to do the stuff that I'm passionate about. And this happens to be it. So I'm fortunate. It's been 2 years and it's going great. I'm really enjoying it.
You've spoken on many talent-related leadership development, communication topics, and you've written, as of tomorrow, 17 best-selling HarperCollins and American Management Association books. Congratulations on the upcoming book and the book we will be discussing today as well. But of all the different topics that you've written about and talked about, what are your most favorites?
I always like the ones about tough conversations. That's where the roadblock is. Managers know what to do, they just don't know how to do it. And I've always said it's like the path of least resistance is avoidance. They just look the other way, they sweep it under the rug, they hope it fixes itself until some proverbial straw is broken on the camel's back. And then boom, it blows up. And then they come running into my office in human resources. Historically, that's what would happen. And so it was important to me. I didn't want to be the bad guy. They were my clients. So I didn't want to be the obstacle. But what I needed to do is I needed to get in front of the audiences there at the companies where I've worked and train them on this stuff. They needed to understand how I looked at things from my vantage point. And if you can give them the tools to make it easier for them to open up conversations that are difficult, I call it constructive confrontation, right? Yeah, it's hard news, but you're sharing it in a constructive way. You can phrase things so that it's in the person's best interest in terms of their career and professional development. You might want to change this because it could hold you back over your career. That makes people more receptive to the message without making them feel judged, without exaggerating. The conflict comes in. You always do this. You never do that. That makes people feel like they're in second grade being chided by the teacher. That doesn't work. So if you can give them at least the opening piece to that conversation and then talk about how it's probably going to unfold, it's a little bit of a fly on the wall, but I like it. People have said to me, it's weird. It went just like you said it would in the book. Um, and I don't have magic tea leaves to see what the future is, but I know that people tend to respond a certain way based on how you approach them on particular topics.
And today I wanted to highlight one of your newest books, First Time Manager Leading Through Crisis. I think you have a hard copy there that you can show us the cover.
I do. I happen to keep it. I sleep with it under my pillow. So that's what it looks like, the book. There you go. So
This was another book that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I wanted to, because it talks about leading through crisis. It is so important post-COVID, especially having those tough conversations. It's a book in the series, and it's a standalone, but it's also in the series. And can you tell us a little bit more about what made you write this book now?
So the folks at HarperCollins, the book was called The First Time Manager, and it's been out since the 80s. And it sold bajillions of copies. It's one of those things. And they said, Paul, we want to create an umbrella underneath the first time manager. And we're going to do it by discipline. So it'll be the first time manager HR, the first time manager sales, the first time manager, whatever. Will you write the HR book? And I said, yes, I will. I would love to. And that's the one that's coming out tomorrow, Tatyana. But they said, before you write that one, we want you to write another one. Would you write one that can pair well with all the other books that are going to come out in this series? Like a book that you're picking up the first time manager sales, but ooh, I want to get this book too. Would you give some thought to what that book should be? And I said, I don't have to think about it. It's leading through crisis and disruption. Since COVID, we are all building the plane while we're flying it. Our hair is on fire. We are chasing our tails. We are trying to stay one step ahead of this game. And everyone feels it. And it's almost like people's wires are exposed and they're tired. You talk about burnout and all these other things. And I said, that's the book that needs to be written. It didn't have to come out under the First Time Manager series. It's written for all levels of management. But the reality was they wanted it within that family of books. I was very honored to do so. But that's the one that kind of updates the 101 Tough Conversations. But it takes everything we learned during COVID and in this post-COVID reintegration phase that we're in and builds it in there, because these are the things I think that are keeping people up at night.
Glad that you mentioned that even though in the title it says first time manager, it's for any leader, I would say, from aspiring leaders to experienced leaders. I've been in talent management and coaching for 20 years, and I've always picked something incredibly interesting and in your book. So
Good,
thank you.
thank you. No, I appreciate that. It's great.
One of the things that I picked out that I wanted to ask you about is you say something interesting, almost counterintuitive in the book. The job of a leader is not to motivate his or her people. What is the job of a leader?
To inspire them in a way. But the problem, Tatyana, too many times is managers are always thinking about what should I be doing to motivate my employees? And I teach at UCLA. And when I go through the classes, I always ask the same questions. I'm like, come on, you guys, tell me about your best boss you've ever had, your favorite boss. What made that person your favorite boss? What were the top 2 or 3 characteristics? And the first student raises his or her hand and says, oh, my favorite boss is someone who inspired me. She challenged me to do things I didn't even think I was ready for. She seemed to have more faith in me than I had in myself. Great. Second student. Well, my favorite boss was someone who really valued education. It was because of him I went back and got my degree. And they go around the room. And the bottom line is what I tell them is, are you describing that person's beingness or their doingness? I mean, I know it's both, but is it who they were being, who they are? Is that the driver, or what they do or what they did? Is that the driver? And ultimately they go back and forth, but it almost, I'd say 9 times out of 10, someone in the back of the room says, wait a second. It's the beingness that drives the doingness. It's who they are that dictates what they do. And in that, it actually makes it fairly simple. That's true. There's the wisdom in that. We don't need to be doing all of this stuff. I'm worried about motivate. Motivation is internal. I can't motivate you. You cannot motivate me. It's impossible. We can only motivate ourselves. As a manager, you're responsible for creating the right in certain circumstances where people can motivate themselves. And if you funnel it through a prism of simply becoming someone's favorite boss, if you think, who is my favorite boss to me and why, you'll probably be describing their beingness, number one. And then you think, how do I pay this forward? How do I be that to someone else? And as long as you can make the space for people to motivate themselves, they'll love you for that. They're not going anywhere for 20%. If they can work for someone, when I work for Tatyana, I'm at the top of Maslow's hierarchy. I feel like I'm really hitting it on all cylinders. I just feel good about myself. She has a great sense of humor. There's no obstacle that we can't get over together. And I always feel like I'm learning. That's it. They're not going anywhere. But that's the key. The key to retention is 2 things. Number one, by far, the relationship with the immediate manager. And number 2, the learning curve. People want to feel like they're learning, they're growing, the career and professional development piece, not just what I can do for the company, but what the company can do for me. So I think as long as you keep that in mind, motivation is not something you're responsible for, but you can create those surfaces, those those circumstances just by being a certain way. It comes down to two things: your caring and your character. If you care about your employees, and when I say character, I mean trust and respect, and you can imbue that in a relationship, they're not going anywhere because they're going to give you their best effort every day.
Research, time and time, I check research almost on a daily basis. It shows that people don't leave companies, they leave managers, or lately kind of these uninspiring workplaces where there's no circumstances, as you say, no environment that was created for them to motivate themselves, to be internally motivated, to do more. That sense of connectedness instead of transactional. I come here
Right.
to exchange my time for a few bucks. Well, of course, if somebody offers you a buck more across the street, you're gonna go there. But
All
if
else
an
being equal, you're absolutely right. Sure.
organization creates that sense of connectedness on the team, and it's not an organization that creates it, it's the leadership, leaders, team leaders that create the circumstances. So yeah, I love that, and I love that distinction. That's why I wanted to highlight it. The motivation is internal, and the job of a leader, especially for new leaders, it's important for them to grasp that concept. Otherwise they're trying to control the uncontrollable, which is people.
Correct. I totally agree. There's a book story in there. I think a book title, Controlling the Uncontrollable. I kind of like it. We might be onto something there. We'll co-write it. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, we do this in our daily lives, trying to
Yeah.
do that. I have to remind myself as a coach, okay, you really can't control how you can control yourself. Um,
Right.
that's a good segue to the next topic that I thought was interesting to bring up, a topic of guilt. I always say nobody can make you feel any particular way. Again, going back to you can't control other people, so therefore other people cannot control you. So if you feel any particular way, it's more about you than about external factors. Although we're used to saying, oh, she made me feel guilty, or he made me upset. It's like somebody else made you whatever, feel whatever. But the reality is you choose to be a certain way. Um, and when we talk about guilt, guilt can be good. Is that what you're saying in the book? In what context?
Yeah, you're smiling. I know. Yeah. No. Okay. So wait. I will explain. There is some logic to this craziness. Um, there are three moral emotions. I had written a book on workplace ethics, and they are guilt and shame and fear. And the funny thing is, shame never belongs in the workplace. Fear really doesn't work well in the workplace either, but guilt can. And what I mean by that is not guilt in the old-fashioned sense, Tatyana, of making people feel bad about themselves, but guilt is more of an internal driver, right? It makes you look at your own inner emotions, hopefully to assume some kind of partial responsibility for a problem. So for example, where the anger? Let me give you an example. Boss is yelling at the employee in front of the whole team. That employee is in total self-defense mode. When there's anger, the anger is 100% external. You go into self-defense. It's not my fault. It's your fault. It's someone else's fault, but it's certainly not my fault. Anger doesn't do anything except make people mad, but it doesn't solve any problems. If that same boss who is mad at a subordinate held a meeting in private and said something like, Tatyana, look, that meeting was a little hard for me. And I don't know why you felt like it was okay to talk to me in that tone of voice, but I just want to let you know I'd never talk to you in that tone of voice in front of everyone else that was in that room. I respect you too much. But I'll be honest with you, it really embarrassed me. It hurt my feelings. I'm just kind of shocked because I didn't think we had that kind of relationship. The employee immediately goes, oh, Paul, I'm sorry. That's not what I intended to do. I'm sorry. I didn't. As soon as they can say, I'm sorry, as soon as they can get to a point where they can assume partial responsibility, they can fix the problem. It's no big deal. But it depends. If you go after it with anger, that makes them angry, they go into self-defense mode. If you go after it with guilt, or maybe a better word is awareness, right? But awareness is not an emotion. So I'm picking a human emotion. The guilt lets you look internally for partial responsibility and typically makes you say, I'm so sorry. I didn't intend for it to go that way. Or if that's how you perceived it, that's my bad. Again, I'll apologize for that. As soon as you can get them into that mode, it's like we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We can agree on coming to something that'll solve a problem. It's still not going to make me feel happy, but at least we can get to the point where we both can agree, or even agree to disagree, but it's done respectfully. And we reset the expectations as management that going forward, this is what I would expect to see happen in a similar situation. So anyway, again, it makes you look internally. It makes you assume partial responsibility to that degree. That heightened level of self-awareness can always help. That's most associated with guilt. So
Accountability for actions. Um, do you think it's tied to kind of internal moral compass, and not everyone is capable of having such a reasonable conversation?
yeah, it is. Some people just don't have that gene, right? We talk about emotional intelligence and having a high EQ, their emotional quotient, which typically talks about the level of empathy they have for being able to walk in someone else's shoes and understanding how things might feel or look like from someone else's perspective. The proverbial bull in the china closet doesn't necessarily have a very high level of otherness or awareness of others, but it can be taught. The thing is, the difference between your IQ, your intelligence quotient, and your EQ, your emotional intelligence, one is what you're born with. I mean, your IQ is kind of your IQ. You could probably do some things to spike it a little bit, but for the most part, we are about as smart as we are when we're born. When you look at EQ, becoming a better listener, becoming more empathetic in terms of how you're leading, becoming more of a consensus builder rather than a top-down manager, do it my way or the highway. That actually is a skill that's learnable, which is why there's so many business management books out there. And you know, Tatyana, in our wonderful field of executive coaching, so many times what they need us for is the behavioral piece. It's like these are successful executives. They're just not getting along with people, or they're turning off their team, or they're turning off their boss, or their coworkers. They're having a hard time getting along. They typically don't call me, at least in my experience, and say, Paul, we need your help maximizing this person's performance. The performance is usually not the problem. It's the behavior, it's the conduct, it's their ability to build emotional relationship. It's just not there. And that's, I think, something that, because it's growable, a coach can really help.
Makes a lot of sense. And of course, all of these issues tie back to turnover, productivity, retention, both on the individual contributor side as well as leaders. Which one do you think?
Remote, because remote's hotter these days. This whole thing, this pull, tug of war. We want them back in the office. If I have to go back in the office 5 days a week, I'm going to leave and find another job. There's so much noise around this right now. And what happened was, when we moved into a fully remote workforce, because we had to, back during the COVID days, the just-in-time technology came out. So we had Microsoft Teams, and we had Zoom and whatever, Google Meets, all these different things are coming out. What we realized was we could keep the wheels on the bus. We could still keep the company moving. And people kind of liked it, or at least the idea of, well, why should I have to go to work Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, deal with the traffic and everything else if we can get this work done remotely? So I understood that piece of it. Then the second moving tectonic plate here, Tatyana, was CEOs are saying, well, yeah, I hear you, but COVID has ended, and we want to make sure we don't lose our culture. We know that teamwork is really, really critical, and it doesn't lend itself well to having, conferences on videos. It's better to be in person. And the third thing, interestingly enough, in asking these CEOs in these surveys, is they know the Gen Z, the Zoomers, the 25 and under crowd, are testing out as the loneliest, most isolated, most depressed cohort on the planet, even more so than the people in retirement homes. They've missed their graduations because of COVID. The bottom line is remote work did not help this younger group. And we all know, when we think back, for those of us who are older, yeah, my early years in the workplace, who was my mentor? Who was my coach? Who were my best friends? And that's missing. And so there is really this benevolent sense of, we want to get Gen Z plugged back in because they're the first truly digital generation. Their ability to have really strong social connections is not as strong, and it's showing itself in all these various analyses that they're doing. So the bottom line is, there's good intention for bringing people back. And for what I'm reading, most CEOs are hoping to get everyone back to full-time on-site by end of 2026. Anyway, that's what the literature is saying. We don't know. The bottom line is, I think digital work will be here, or I should say not digital, I should say remote work will be here in some form, probably forever, because the technology allows it. And I understand that pull of getting people back in versus that resistance of wanting to go, of having to go back. But just be reasonable on this. If you're the CEO, if you're the business owner, explain these things. Let people understand what you're thinking about. Let them not just, fiat, mandate, you will come back or you will resign your job. That's not going to work. And you could end up losing really good people, especially while the market is still very tight. It's a tight labor market these days. There's not a lot of people. So now is not the time to put your foot on the gas and hope everyone comes along for the ride, because they may not. But on the flip side, as an employee, yeah, I get it. You kind of want to keep some level of flexibility because it's nice. Only having Saturdays and Sundays, that's old. That's a different century now. We're used to having a little bit more flexibility in our lives. That's reasonable too. So somewhere in that, companies are going to meld this all together. And different companies, they'll have different approaches. But I would say is explain your intentions, talk about where your heart is, make sure that people understand that you're not doing this to be mean. You're doing this for good reason. But the bottom line is, it is true that you will lose some culture, you will lose some sense of teamwork and communication when it's all remote. And the risk that the younger gen has, or the generation that's working fully off-site, not only is the fact that they're out of sight, out of mind, but statistically, they're the ones who are going to get laid off. If there's a company layoff, there's no connection to them. So no one's fighting for them. It's just like, well, get rid of the remote people first, because we don't really know them anyway. It's going back and forth. It does benefit remote workers to spend some amount of time in that office. And it does benefit the company to have these people on site. And a lot of companies are saying, we want you back 3 days a week, but everyone comes back on those 3 days so that it's not scatterground. We want everyone, partnering together. That's a good, healthy approach. And I think that's the best way to look at this.
Yeah, I appreciate your insight, and I agree with you. I think the research every day seems to go back and forth. Oh, we're going to go fully back to pre-COVID remote work levels. And then another article will come out. Research shows that we're going to go fully remote because that's what Gen Z want. Or it's going to be somewhere in between. And I agree with you. I think the truth is going to land somewhere in between, because you have to strike a balance that is it's not what's good for the economy. It's what's good for your company first. And if your company is good, then it's going to be good for the economy. And being balanced, depending on your product line, depending on your company culture, depending on your leadership culture as well, are you able to promote that sense of connectedness in a hybrid environment? I've seen many companies successfully doing it. They can teach others a few things.
And what I was just going to say, Tatyana, is when you think about being a successful leader in a hybrid environment, your leadership style has to be more deliberate, more purposeful, right? You're not running into people in the break room. Hey, how's it going? You don't do that. So you have to build it into your schedule. But the funny thing is, when you look at these CEO surveys of what they are looking for in their top leaders, it's so funny because emotional intelligence is coming up as like one of the top 5 in survey after survey after survey. Now, when I was younger in my career, we called it soft skills. And when we said we wanted to do soft skills training, they'd all be like, go away. That's such an HR thing, Falcone. Get out of here. No, we're not doing that. Okay. But now all of a sudden they call it emotional intelligence as one of the top 5 priorities on the CEO's checklist. Why? Because we know that in a remote environment, it's hard to really keep strong relationships. And with people leaving very easily these days, and how difficult it is to find replacements, all of a sudden the CEOs are realizing, this thing that we've taken for granted, this talent, whatever, it's not guaranteed to come to work every day. And the thing too is, which is interesting to me, is COVID has just shone a light on it. This is going to be for the rest of the century. If you read a book, there's a great book called The Next 100 Years. It's by George Friedman. And it is a New York Times bestseller. And it talks about labor scarcity in the industrialized nations is going to be through the 2080s. I mean, this is really something that we have to look at, because it's going to be a major, major, profit lever or determiner of how far a company can go is, can it attract people and can it keep them? Up to now with baby booms and millennials, we've had plenty of human beings in on the sidelines waiting to jump in. It's not going to be that way, not for us or many other industrialized countries going forward into the rest of this century. So we have to kind of really be smart about this. We have to do long-term views. We can't just look at short-term. It's interesting times.
It is. I think I could talk to you forever. Well, we're all out of time. I highly recommend that everyone pick up the book, The First Time Manager Leading Through Crisis, and check out other books in the series and other Paul Falcone's amazing books, full of wisdom. Any last couple of words of wisdom that you would like to share with the audience?
I like the way you were ending it just a minute ago. It was actually, no, I'm kidding. It was very complimentary. Thank you. No, I think that these are crazy times when you look at the agility, the fact that we need people who are adaptable. When you think of collaboration, the fact that we need good communicators, people who know how to build strong bonds. The fact that COVID forced us to do this, the fact that remote leadership forced us to do this is a factor that will make us stronger leaders going forward. It really will, because what we've taken for granted was up until COVID, it was kind of a given. I hate to say it, but there was that expression, Tatyana, if you don't like it, there's the door. We don't do that anymore, if you notice. It's like, wait a second, these people, we realize that you can't keep your restaurant open without cooks and wait staff. And you can't keep your business open without nurses and whatever. All of a sudden, it's like when the human talent piece of this thing, all of a sudden got its aha moment, HR finally has its seat at the table, believe it or not, because now CEOs are like, yeah, who's the department, which department is the shepherd of our people? And it's like, it's really the HR practices that are going on there. So all of a sudden, like it or not, HR's got its seat at the table. It's time to deliver, but it's an interesting time. And again, to the degree that I think people can look at this challenge as opportunity and say, I want to be on the front end of the spear, on the sharp end of the spear on this one. I want to be leading the change. If you look at it that way, it's very healthy. And the pieces will fall in place and they'll all align themselves. So thank you for inviting me to join your show. I really appreciate it.
Challenges are not going away, so that's well said. Take this challenge and adversity and turn it into an opportunity.
Right.
And now we have resources provided by Paul Falcone, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thanks, Tatyana. My pleasure.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. Please like us, comment, and share with your network. We look forward to seeing you on future episodes of Great People Talk. And please don't forget to pick up Paul Falcone's latest books, First Time Manager HR and First Time Manager Leading Through Crisis.